What's the oldest unfinished sketchbook you own? For me, it's this one, a Moleskine watercolor album that I got literally over a decade ago. And yet it's still unfinished. I recently found it again in a box, and I'm really determined to finally fill it. The other day I was drawing some dragon heads as practice for a larger illustration I'm planning and working on. Haku ended up on my little collection. And so I got distracted and wanted to draw more Spirited Away and Chihiro. I started with some quick pencil sketches of my favorite characters. Now this sketchbook is of course for watercolors, and the texture of the paper isn't great for soft, dark pencils, as I can't get beautiful lines or even shading with them. But B or 2B pencils that are sharpened to a very fine point work alright for quick line drawings. Ghibli movies always have these detailed, beautiful backgrounds, which create an interesting contrast with the characters, who, while lively and expressive, are of course in a much simpler art style. I was interested in exploring that contrast, that difference, on this sketchbook page, but had no idea how it would go. I have to be honest. There's a reason this sketchbook is mostly unfinished. While I really enjoyed some other sketchbooks by Moleskine, this watercolor album's paper was frustrating to paint on from the very start. The paper is 25% cotton, and while I usually enjoy a cold-pressed paper for quick studies and sketches, there's something about this paper that makes the colors not sink into the paper at all. It can feel like pushing paint around on a sealed surface at times, and no beautiful watercolor textures or patterns emerge naturally. So while I've occasionally sketched in this with watercolors, pencils and pens, I gave up on it for a few years and only remembered I even had it recently, as I was drawing some oil pastel sketches and portraits. Knowing that the watercolors would be difficult to control and paint with in this sketchbook, I added a single poster color by Shinhan in a white shade. Mixing this into, or layering it on top of, the watercolors makes it possible to work with them a little bit like gouache, and combat some of the paper's tendency to not absorb the colors the way I want to. My watercolor brushes have been feeling a bit neglected lately. I've been painting mostly with acrylics and sketching with pencils, charcoal and oil pastels, while I prefer the softest of these, the Escoda Tendo, on other papers. For the Moleskine paper, I went with a brush that had a bit more tension, so I could, maybe a tad aggressively, push the paint around. The Escoda Ultimo is great for this mixture of media, and I've used it with gouache in the past too. No Face is the perfect example of what I meant earlier with the simple characters in front of elaborate, whimsical, dreamlike backgrounds. Here, No Face is standing in the rain, surrounded by flowers like camellias and hydrangeas, and they're as simple a shape and color palette as one could imagine a character to be. I love all those early scenes with No Face and Chihiro. Even in a world of spirits, no face is otherworldly and strange, and I've been fascinated with that mood ever since I first saw the movie so many years ago. Towards the end of the year and in the new year as well, I had a lot of client work, especially over the holidays, and I really enjoyed starting a sketchbook page without a proper plan or even a reason beyond I want to. I've been very focused on studies and trying to learn more, so painting these Ghibli scenes that have nothing to do with my personal art style felt very relaxing. It also let me reconnect to these art supplies I hadn't been using often enough. As I was coloring, I started to get a bit frustrated with the paper as expected. It was worse than I remembered even, maybe because I'd been working on arch paper on occasion and have also gotten used to acrylics and their opaque colors. And maybe I've just lost the delicate touch and patience needed for watercolors. So, mixed media it is. I was already mixing that poster color by Shinhan with my watercolors to make them more opaque, but after the page had dried completely, I went over the colors with colored pencils. I have a grand total of 4 luminance pencils that are really soft but create intense colors. The polychromos, which I have more shades of, sadly didn't work well on top of the watercolor layers. They are sharper and harder than the luminance, and it felt more like scratching the paper, so I had to use very little pressure to layer these. But in the end, I really liked the look that the colored pencils added to the watercolors. For the two Haku scenes, well, you can really see how I had to fight the watercolor paper here. Instead of sinking into the fibers and creating vibrant watercolor washes, the colors just kind of sat on top of the paper, and I ended up using a lot of the poster color to make things stick. Just adding more watercolor layers didn't work either, as the paper starts to buckle and dissolve quite quickly. I always enjoy drawing movie scenes, no matter the medium or style, and a while ago I saw the 100 Scenes challenge pop up on my YouTube feed. What do you think? 100 movie scenes sounds very intimidating, especially because I'm quite slow when drawing, as you can see here. But if I count little sketches like this and don't put too much pressure on myself, I believe it could be an incredibly valuable, fun challenge with lots of variety. I'm very tempted to fill this old sketchbook with some more movie studies, be it Ghibli or something completely different. And they are a great way to explore color palettes, too. On the topic of movie studies, sketching animated movie scenes feels very different. It felt like my own art style completely disappeared, which doesn't happen when I try to draw a more realistic character. While it didn't bother me here, as I just wanted to relax and test out different mixed media techniques, I'd be curious to see if I can draw a scene from this movie that feels more me, or if the Ghibli art style just completely overpowers my own by being too adorable and amazing. Finding my own art style, especially for characters, has been a long struggle for me, and I hope to explore that more this year. I would have loved some soft, delicate watercolor washes for the background behind Haku in this scene, especially for those purple clouds. But I just couldn't get the color to look saturated and even enough, so again, colored pencils came to the rescue. A bit worried I'd damage the paper after so many layers of color and water, I went with mostly just the few Prismacolor shades that I have, as those are incredibly soft, and it turns out that they layer beautifully on top of watercolors. I'd love to experiment with this combination more in the future. It feels so soothing and satisfying. If this were a review for this watercolor sketchbook, it would be quite a bad one. There's a reason it still has so many empty pages even after over a decade, and that a sketchbook intended for watercolors contains mostly pencil and pen sketches. And even for those, I'd prefer a smoother surface, so they are not an ideal solution. I might give oil pastels or dry pastels another go in here if I continue with more movie scenes. Oil pastels especially are pretty resilient and work on any kind of paper, and I'd sketched hydrangea flowers in this sketchbook before. The one thing I can say for this Moleskine album is that the cover and binding are very sturdy and well made, and even after a decade, it holds up well. At this point, I just want to fill it so that I can put it away for good. That's maybe another good reason to paint more movie studies. That would fill up this old sketchbook quickly. What do you usually do to fill sketchbooks you're not happy with, or if you're feeling uninspired? In the end, despite the paper struggles, this was a very relaxing sketchbook spread to paint and draw. I especially loved exploring line art, be it with colored pencils or poster color mixed with watercolors, on top of the watercolor base, to make the characters stand out more, and to imitate the cell shading of their animated counterparts. I also realized how dark and saturated some of the Ghibli backgrounds are, and would love to paint more of them. Do you have a specific movie you'd like to see me tackle next, or one that you think would be a great challenge? I hope this was as relaxing for you to watch as it was for me to paint. And I also hope that you'll come with me on this journey of hopefully filling this sketchbook and all my other ones. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next art video.